France and the UK announcing a co-leadership for a European coalition for Ukraine.
Europe will not back down on its support for Ukraine. French President Emmanuel Macron has announced that France and the United Kingdom will send reassurance troops to the war-torn country.
And Emmanuel Macron and Prime Minister Keir Starmer includes a one-month truce along with the deployment of European soldiers in Ukraine as peacekeepers.
So what could this coalition look like without US support, and how could it work on the ground?
Leaders of nearly 30 countries and the heads of North Atlantic Treaty Organization and the European Union met in the French capital Paris to discuss increasing aid to Kiev and the deployment of European troops to ensure long-term peace. The meeting in Paris comes amid intensified efforts to secure a ceasefire amid pressure from US President Donald Trump for Russia to end its war in Ukraine, now in its fourth year. As is well known, Russia is at a crossroads after 3 years of the Ukrainian war. European countries remain united to build peace through force and continue negotiations to win peace. Following Russia's failure to respond to Ukraine's peace initiative and its continued aggression, Europe is determined to send peacekeepers. More than 30 senior military officials from Europe and other countries met in Britain on Thursday to discuss plans to send an international peacekeeping force to Ukraine as details of a partial ceasefire are worked out. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said he did not know whether there would be a peace deal in the Russia-Ukraine war, but said they were taking steps in the right direction as the coalition of the willing led by Britain and France entered the operational phase. Emmanuel Macron announced a plan to send reinforcements from several European countries to be stationed at certain strategic points in Ukraine in the event of a peace deal with Russia. These reassurance forces will not replace the Ukrainian armed forces and will be stationed in strategic towns and bases, not on the front lines. Speaking to reporters at a press conference following the high-stakes coalition of the Volunteer Summit for Ukraine in Paris on Thursday, Macron said that these forces would act as a deterrent against possible Russian aggression. In the coming weeks, this proposal will be discussed by our chiefs of staff, and the map and format of these deployments will be determined. These reassurance forces will not replace or diminish our efforts on the eastern flank of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, but will come in addition, Macron said. While Macron expressed his desire for the support of the United States in the event of a deployment directed against Europe, he stressed the need to prepare for a scenario in which Europe would have to act independently. The French leader also announced that a French-British team will be sent to Ukraine to prepare the format of tomorrow's Ukrainian army in order to analyze what kind of equipment Kiev will need to counter Russian aggression. At the same time, Romania's Supreme National Defense Council decided on Friday to continue military support to Ukraine. This was reported by the Romanian Gazeta, citing a press release by the Romanian presidential administration. It is noted that this was the first meeting of the Romanian Supreme National Defense Council after Ilie Bolojan took office as interim president of Romania in February. The council meeting analyzed the developments in Russia's illegal and unprovoked war against Ukraine. Special attention was paid to the situation on the ground, as well as to the stage and prospects of the settlement negotiations, the press release said. Romania welcomed the results of the recent ceasefire talks in Riyadh and the efforts of the United States as the first step towards reaching a peace agreement. As a neighboring country with the longest land and sea border with Ukraine, Romania has a direct interest in ending the war. We want Ukraine to enjoy peace and be able to follow the European path in accordance with the decisions taken at European Union level. Our support for Ukraine will continue, the Romanian president's press release said. The meeting also discussed the issue of strengthening defense on the eastern flank of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and agreed that Romania will gradually increase the share of its gross domestic product allocated to defense. Following the meeting, the Romanian Supreme National Defense Council approved the strengthening of bilateral and allied coordination to strengthen deterrence and defense forces on the eastern flank of the alliance, including the deployment of North Atlantic Treaty Organization forces to Romania and the implementation of additional support measures for Ukraine in accordance with Allied decisions and international obligations. It will be recalled that earlier, on February 28th, the acting president of Romania, Ilie Bolojan, had proposed that the country become a hub for the deployment of Western troops to Ukraine. Meanwhile, the European Union needs to spend £60 billion for the rapid movement of North Atlantic Treaty Organization troops to the Eastern Front. For a decade, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization has been begging European countries to fix the narrow passages for its so-called war map. Now, European Union commissioners admit that they still need to spend $60 billion to allow North Atlantic Treaty Organization troops to move quickly across Europe. Europe needs to spend at least $60 billion to quickly complete the so-called war map of Europe. The rail, road, sea, and air corridors that allow troops to move quickly to the front lines in wartime. Since 2014, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization has been trying to persuade European member states to fix critical bottlenecks, but faces obstacles such as red tape and incompatible procedures. One problem for capitals in Central and Eastern Europe is that they are often reluctant to force local governments to pay the money needed to reinforce bridges so they can move heavily armored columns and widen roads. Another is that different countries have different rules. In one case, tanks from one member state were not allowed to pass through another because they exceeded weight limits set by road traffic regulations, the European Union's financial watchdog said in a recent report. This is particularly relevant for bridges in Eastern Europe. While during the Cold War, Western Europe's infrastructure was often reinforced to handle the weight of 60-ton North Atlantic Treaty Organization tanks, Eastern Europe could not afford to build such a robust tank and had to accommodate much lighter Soviet tanks such as the T-72, which weighed only 45 tons anyway. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization poured $4 billion of central funds into the Battle Map project, saying the program was only halfway complete in 2018. But the European Commission has identified at least 500 more hotspot projects that need to be addressed urgently and quickly, such as expanding ports and airports, widening tunnels, and strengthening rail bridges. The bloc's European Union military mobility project had a budget of just $1.4 billion for 2021 to 27. Brussels allocated the entire budget to Ukraine following Russia's illegal invasion in 2022, meaning that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization will not be available to solve problems on European soil for another 2 years, until its coffers are full again. The $60 billion estimate was announced by Andrius Kubilius, the European Commissioner for Defense and Space. "We need to develop this infrastructure according to North Atlantic Treaty Organization planning," said the former Lithuanian Prime Minister. "Then we also need to see the need to establish a very effective defense or protection of strategically important infrastructure points. And in addition to that, we need to examine the legal requirements. We have to look for all possibilities because investment in the defense industry is also an investment in economic development. It is the creation of new jobs." Another solution that would simplify the problem is the creation of a military Schengen. This plan has been on the agenda for more than a decade and has already been adopted by the United States and Canada, which now require 5 days' notice to send troops across European borders. But while both have been allowed to sign a simple administrative arrangement, fears persist that the UK could instead be forced to sign a politically binding administrative agreement. Many of the terms of the administrative arrangement do not appear to be directly related to the rapid movement of troops and armored vehicles across Europe. They range from a binding commitment that the UK must not infringe the security and defense interests of the European Union and its member states, to the sharing of all UK military intellectual property and controls on UK exports outside the European Union. The UK will adhere to European Union spending targets and harmonization of capability requirements, which should only benefit entities that can demonstrate added value on European Union territory. Crucially, the UK will be expected to share classified information with the European Union, in line with regulations requiring European Union member states to openly share intelligence. In December 2020, Defense Secretary Ben Wallace refused to participate because we have serious concerns about intellectual property rights and the export controls he would seek to impose. In other news, Zelensky said Ukraine had formalized agreements on European military aid and intelligence sharing ahead of the upcoming Ramstein summit. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said yesterday that his country is working to finalize agreements with European countries on additional military aid deliveries and expanded intelligence sharing ahead of the upcoming Ramstein summit. The next meeting of the Ukrainian Defense Liaison Group in the Ramstein format is expected to take place in Brussels on April 11th and will be chaired by the United Kingdom. "We have agreed with some leaders on Ukraine's access to ammunition stocks," Zelensky told reporters at a press conference, adding that Ukraine has reached agreements with unnamed countries on the production of air defense and artillery, as well as on investing in the production of Ukrainian drones and missiles. Zelensky noted that the words of support came from European allies at a Paris summit co-chaired by French President Emmanuel Macron and British Prime Minister Keir Starmer on March 27th. Prior to the summit, France announced that it would provide Ukraine with a new military aid package worth €2 billion or $2.1 billion. Macron announced at the end of the Paris summit that some European countries had agreed to advance plans to send troops to Ukraine as a reassurance force if a ceasefire with Russia is reached. Zelensky told reporters that some unnamed European allies had agreed to expand Ukraine's access to intelligence data, related technologies, and satellites belonging to European counterparts. The Allied commitments come after the United States under the Trump administration temporarily halted intelligence sharing with Ukraine following a heated exchange between Trump and President Volodymyr Zelensky at the White House on February 28th. The United States resumed intelligence sharing with Ukraine on March 12th. Following media reports that the United States had threatened to terminate the Starlink service in order to pressure Kiev to sign a mineral agreement with Washington, European officials have also considered alternative satellites to Starlink. The additional support comes as the chiefs of staff of Ukraine, Britain, and France prepare to meet in Ukraine within a week to discuss the possibility of sending foreign troops to the country. Zelensky told a news conference that the United States would consult with Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and some European countries on monitoring the partial ceasefire. Starmer argued that for any peacekeeping coalition to succeed, Europe must have strong American support. So how is Europe preparing to live without the United States in the North Atlantic Treaty Organization? While Europe's North Atlantic Treaty Organization members have publicly expressed confidence in the continent's relationship with the United States, many European leaders are grappling with how to rapidly strengthen their defense capacities in order to rebuild rather than completely eliminate long-standing ties with Washington. According to reports, Europe's most important military powers are making plans to take over much of the responsibility for protecting the continent from the United States. This includes a proposal to the White House for Europe to take over this responsibility over the next decade. Europe is struggling with the reality of its commitments to take responsibility for the continent's defense capabilities. Decades of sidelining defense spending after the end of the Cold War allowed European countries to maintain valuable social welfare systems, but it also left them with huge capability gaps on defense and a deep dependence on the United States, which has become increasingly unpalatable to the White House. Some European countries stepped forward. The Baltic states and Poland, close to Russian territory, have pledged to exceed 3% or more of their gross domestic product in defense spending. Other countries, notably Italy and Spain in Western Europe, have yet to touch the 2% requirement set for North Atlantic Treaty Organization members. The International Institute for Strategic Studies, a UK-based think tank, said in February that European defense spending had increased by almost 24% in real terms in 12, the 10th consecutive year of growth. Yet, European military spending still accounts for less than a third of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization's total defense spending. While consensus across Europe is hard to come by, several countries have made concerted efforts to increase their own defense budgets. Denmark said it would allocate more than 3% of its gross domestic product to defense in 2025 and 2026, in response to the urgency of the situation. According to reports, Britain, France, Germany, and the Nordic countries are in talks to present a proposal to the Oval Office for a phased transfer of responsibility for Europe's defense. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and French President Emmanuel Macron are leading efforts to take control of Europe by involving as many countries as possible in a so-called coalition of the willing to provide security guarantees under a possible ceasefire agreement in Ukraine. For Europe to have the capacity to replace the capabilities currently provided by the United States, it would require 5 to 10 years of high defense spending, excluding American nuclear weapons. Countries are growing their armies. On March 21st, a local Dutch broadcaster reported that the Netherlands hopes to more than double the number of army personnel. Citing unnamed sources, the broadcaster reported that the army would increase from 74,000 to around 200,000 personnel, including reservists and civilian roles. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk said earlier this month that Warsaw hopes to direct about 100,000 volunteers to military training each year from 2027. Tusk said Poland needs an army of about 500,000, including reservists, more than double the current number. The idea of a European army has been around for a long time, but has mostly been dismissed as unworkable and unnecessary due to the continued existence of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization in its current form. But Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, addressing continental leaders in Munich in February, said he was pushing for a fully European military force in a reordered world. "I really believe that the time has come for the creation of Europe's armed forces," Zelensky said, adding, "Let's be honest, we can no longer rule out that America can say no on issues that could threaten Europe." Earlier this month, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen unveiled a new plan called Rearmament Europe, saying that up to $870 billion could be allocated to defense in the European Union. However, the three Baltic states of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia have signed an agreement to increase protection on their land borders with Russia and Belarus in January 2024. Belarus is a key ally of Russia, and the Kremlin used Belarusian territory to launch a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. The country also connects Russia with the isolated Kaliningrad exclave, sandwiched between North Atlantic Treaty Organization members Poland and Lithuania. "We are making this effort so that the Estonian people can feel safe, but if the slightest risk arises, we will be ready faster for various developments," Estonian Defense Minister Hanno Pevkur said. Tallinn said there would be a network of shelters, support points, and distribution lines along the border. Lithuania said it had laid mines near the border with Kaliningrad and installed defensive systems such as Dragon's Teeth against tanks and armored vehicles. Dragon's Teeth are concrete blocks used to stop tank advances and prevent mechanized infantry from gaining ground. This type of anti-tank fortification surrounds Ukraine. Lithuania's neighbor to the north, Latvia, has built similar defenses. The Latvian government said it would transfer about 303 million euros, or $318 million, to build defenses on its eastern border with Russia over 5 years. There will be outposts for support personnel, fortified structures, anti-tank trenches, and storage areas for ammunition and mines, Riga said. "We will be able to more effectively slow down and block the movement of potential aggressors," Latvian Defense Minister Andris Sprūds said last year. Further south, facing Kaliningrad and Belarus, Poland has begun construction of what it calls the Eastern Shield, costing more than $2.5 billion, and described by Warsaw as the largest operation since 1945 to reinforce Poland's eastern border, the eastern flank of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The preparations are not only military but also civilian. In mid-November, Sweden, the newest member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, published a brochure that it says helps the country's residents learn how to prepare and how to act in the event of crisis or war. The brochure outlines what a high alert situation would mean, how each resident would participate in the wartime effort, and how different sirens would sound. Norway has also issued a statement on how to deal with extreme weather, epidemics, accidents, sabotage, and, in the worst-case scenario, acts of war. Finland has public guidelines on how to prepare for the worst threat of war. Long-standing regulations on nuclear weapons are also being reviewed. The United States' powerful arsenal of nuclear weapons, second only to Russia's, has historically been a powerful deterrent against an attack on a North Atlantic Treaty Organization member state. Although Britain and France also have small stockpiles of nuclear weapons, there are big questions about the conditions under which London and Paris would discuss their use, and deep concerns about whether they would be a sufficient deterrent without America's massive nuclear arsenal. Britain and France's nuclear arsenals are a fraction of Russia's stockpile, with fewer than 300 warheads each. French President Macron has floated the idea of extending the protection of Paris's nuclear weapons to the rest of Europe. The idea was welcomed by Poland and the Baltic states of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, but described by the Kremlin as extremely confrontational. Friedrich Merz, Germany's likely next chancellor, said that nuclear arms sharing is something we need to talk about, but that the rest of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization should not lose America's nuclear protection. The changing global security situation now requires us Europeans to discuss this issue together, Merz added. So, what do you think about this issue? We would be glad if you indicate in the comments. Thank you for watching us. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and like to support us.